All right, I believe that we are live now. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Alicia. I'm here to welcome you guys to GMAT Club's MBA application walkthrough. This is a 6-week series that we're doing, and we're covering applications to lots of the top 25 MBA programs. I already see 16 people watching, so this is great. More details on this every Thursday and Friday for 6 weeks. We're featuring admissions experts and admissions team and pretty much going step by step through every aspect of the online applications. So lots of detail and great tips for you guys. Make sure that you guys subscribe to our channel to stay updated and support us in organizing this type of event. Also, leave a like on the video so that you can stay updated if you guys find this type of thing helpful. We want to know so that we can do more of them. So again, I'm the host for today's walkthrough. We're covering Chicago Booth, which is definitely one of the most famous business schools. Together with me is Maria, and she's the founder of Applicant Lab. Maria has helped hundreds of people with their MBA applications, definitely super experienced and knowledgeable. And welcome, Maria. It's great to have you. I'll hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alicia. It is great to be here. And hi, everyone out there in GMAT Club land. Thank you so much for joining me. I am going to pull up my screen share. So, yep, there we go. The Chicago Booth application. So for those of you who have not been to one of these sessions before, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the application, but not literally line by line, because then we'll be here for 40 hours and you already know your first name anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to point out the things that are maybe noteworthy. Because every application is a little bit different from school to school. And so what I really wanted to point out is things that, might be a slightly different. So if you've already started filling out some of your applications for other schools, and perhaps, you're like, oh, I'm just going to copy and paste everything from application to application to application. Unfortunately, they don't make it that easy. I wish they would, but they don't. So that's going to be my focus today. Okay, so here we are. We are on the first screen of the Booth application, and the only thing that I thought was really interesting here is that sometimes the schools tend to use these applications also as last minute marketing materials, right? So I thought it was really interesting that they highlight, look at how many alumni we have, right? 57,000 Booth alumni. And then here, one of the things they mentioned, sort of 3 bullet points that the Booth MBA experience gives you. 2 of the 3 are things that you can kind of get at most programs, but I did want to point out and really kind of zoom in on this idea about the flexibility to choose your courses. Booth has the most flexible curriculum of any of the top business schools. So this is particularly interesting if you have a very, very strong interest in one specific facet of business and you're not so much interested in like the whole general management. Like I think they have distribution requirements, so you can't just take only one subject, but you can place out of certain subjects. You can, there are lots of different options, I think, for how to fulfill those requirements, and you can start taking electives right away. Compare that to a school like Harvard, where you cannot take electives usually until your entire second year. So in other words, the entire first year goes by and then you're allowed to take electives. So this is something really interesting to keep in mind. And I do think that it is one of the coolest aspects of the Booth degree. So they seem to know it as well. And that's why they are highlighting it in their application. So this next section, program, basically here you're going to select what you are applying to. Quick side note, this Civic Scholars Program, what this is this is a specific program that, first of all, if you work for a nonprofit or government organization, you have the potential to be entered into consideration for this program. And what it does is it gives you a potential for a full scholarship, a sizable to potentially full scholarship. And also there's additional programming with the Rustindy Social Enterprise, Social Impact Center at Booth. So if you currently work for a nonprofit organization or for the government, even if it's not the US government, I think it is open to people from not just the United States. So definitely you might as well select this and see what happens, right? The worst thing that they can say is no. And I think they are clear down here that, yeah, even if you don't get into the Civic Scholars Program, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not getting into Booth at all. You might still get in. So I think that that's something that not a lot of schools do. So I want you to be aware of that. They also have, this is a side note, I don't think this applies to a ton of people, but if you happen to have gone to the University of Chicago for undergrad, you might be able to qualify to like You can do an accelerated option, or you might even be able to skip having to submit a GMAT score, but that's not most people. So assuming that that does not apply to you. If it does apply to you, go ahead and click and check it out. But I'm assuming that it doesn't probably statistically speaking apply to you. So I'm just going to keep moving. So the biographical section, as with most schools, this is pretty straightforward stuff. They have, basically your name, your information, date of birth, all that good stuff. I don't think that there is anything here. Let me see if there's the only thing here that I thought was potentially perhaps not immediately straightforward. And now I can't find it. Was it here? Oh, maybe it goes on. Actually, it's in the next section. It's under personal history. So biographical, actually, I mean, hopefully, if you are of the intellectual caliber that Booth necessitates, I would hope that that you can fill this part out on your own. Now, in personal history is when they're going to get back more into, this is interesting. This used to be a section where prior to the recent Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action, they would ask you about your ethnic background, your race, things like that. With the current the sort of banning of affirmative action effectively, now the only thing they can ask is your gender identity and your LGBTQ, how you identify in terms of that. So I think it's interesting because some of the schools, it's like it used to be like a very long form with all kinds of boxes, and now it makes it seem like it's just about your gender, but that's not it. It's just that they had to delete everything else, and so as a percentage, as the proportion of the page, a lot of it is now about your gender and sexual orientation. They do ask if you are a first generation college student. So this is a way of trying to get at, we can't necessarily ask you your race now, but we can try to get a sense of, did you come from, say, a low income background? And if so, have you sort of had to overcome certain barriers? Frequently, first generation college students do not do as well in especially their first year at college. It takes them some more time because they just haven't had that mentorship from their parents. So the good news is if you are a first generation college student and maybe your grades, especially that first year of college, maybe weren't quite as strong as you would like, don't worry, because you can just select this here, and there will be understanding applied to the assessment of your transcript. Now, this was the box that I was thinking about a second ago. Is there anything about your upbringing or family household circumstances that you would like the admissions committee to know? Now, it's interesting because I think that there is a temptation sometimes when we see an open text box in an application form, there's a temptation to be like, well, it's empty and that makes me uncomfortable, so I have to put something here. But I would caution you to proceed with caution and with a little bit of self-awareness. If we think about the fact that in the past, this form was where you would enter in more information about, say, if you were from a marginalized ethnic or racial group, and now they can't ask that. When they ask things like, is there anything about your family upbringing or family circumstances that you want us to know? I strongly feel that they are trying to get at whether or not you have had some sort of obstacle in your upbringing. This Obviously, this could be financial, like that's sort of the first thing that comes to mind. It could be other things, like maybe you had to take care of a sick relative. Maybe you have a sibling that has a severe disability and that impacted the way that you grew up. Maybe you experienced times of homelessness during your childhood, things like that. Anything that what I would advise here is to talk about if you had any real big obstacles that you had to overcome. I do not think that this is the place to be like, yeah, my family's from Milwaukee and we all really love the Milwaukee sports teams and like I don't think that that's really what they're getting at. So I've seen sometimes people just feel like I have to put something about my family, and if you are from a from a family that has not experienced sort of the typical sort of difficulties that we think of, then I would honestly just leave this blank. And then we get down here to, have you been involved in any of the following scholarship programs or MBA application mentorship programs? So some of them, the Forte MBA launch program is open to women, but some of these other ones really are, like QuestBridge, for example. These are other things. I think the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation Scholarship is also, these are undergraduate scholarships for usually US citizens who are from low income backgrounds. So a lot of this is, again, trying to get at, are you from one of these low income backgrounds, since we now have to try to find other ways to try to ascertain that from your application. So moving on to the next section, Booth and You. So here, the first thing they ask is, okay, here we've got 14 concentrations. Which do you intend to pursue? And you can pick up to 2. Again, that flexibility in the curriculum means that you really can kind of tailor your educational experience at Booth really however you'd like to. So if you do plan to pursue 1 or 2, well, you have to put at least 1, but if you plan to pursue 2 concentrations, please list them here. Now, keep in mind that later on in the application, they're going to ask a little essay about your kind of career goals and things like that. So just keep in mind, please make sure that you're consistent. Sometimes in the moment, especially because this page is separate from some of the other sections that talk about your career, you might say like, oh, I'm totally going to pick, behavioral science or entrepreneurship or something like that. But then if later on I read your essay and there's nothing in there about entrepreneurship, I'm going to have a little question mark over my head. So that's really my only, just make sure that you're being consistent and that you are being logical in the things that you choose here. Okay, so underneath here, you've got immediate post-MBA career goal, long-term post-MBA career goal, 250 characters. That's really all they want. And, because you can have an opportunity later on to describe this more. I would make this as straightforward and to the point as possible. The only thing I would say is if you are making some sort of a career switch, anyone who's either an Applicant Lab client or who has seen some of my previous videos in the past, that you introduce a certain level of risk to your application if you apply with a career vision that makes you look a little bit wackadoodle, right? If you're like, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to be the CEO of 5 different Fortune 500 companies the day after I graduate, that's great. You're going to sound crazy. So they might be like, ooh, otherwise this person was nice, but I'm not sure that we can give them that career thing that they say they want. I don't know. I mean, our career services team is pretty good, but they're not that good. So yikes, maybe this is a risky person to let in. So what you can start to do is you can think about, where are you going to put, if you are making some sort of career switch, where are you going to explain either the interest that led you to want to make a career switch, or what are some of the things you already have in your background that will make you appealing to those post-MBA employers? Because realize that when an admissions officer is reading your application, they are looking at it through different lenses. They are looking at it from okay, are our professors going to be glad that we let this person in? Is this someone who's going to be able to keep up in class? Or are they going to be the one always raising, like, I don't understand. Can you repeat? I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Right, they don't want that. They want someone that the other students are going to like and not be like, oh, that person, they're so full of themselves, right? They don't want that. But they're also, another one of the lenses through which they're sort of looking at your application is also our campus recruiters, right? When our campus recruiters, when they come to campus, the consulting firms, the banks, whatever, all the millions of companies that will come to do interviews for Booth students, if I put this person in front of this recruiter, how are they going to look at this person? And therefore, the less friction you have with your career goal in terms of like, if I'm like, I'm not stressed at all. I'm like, okay, this person currently works in brand management and they want to make a switch to something kind of similar. Okay, like if I picture putting them in front of a recruiter, I don't think that they're just going to choke and be like, oh, I don't know, I just want to work in tech because it sounds cool. Right. So that's part of why so many schools ask so many like the career questions. How many different ways can you ask me? Right. Because it's like, here's the 250 characters. Here's another 250 characters for the long-term goal. Now there's also a drop-down box for your post-MBA industry and your post-MBA function. And we haven't even gotten to other parts of the application yet. So in case you're wondering, like, why do they keep asking me about this? That is why. And by the way, if you are not sure what to put for your career vision, I have an entire module in Applicant Lab that will walk you through how to think about your own background and what sorts of career visions you might want to apply with. Previous applications, this is just basically, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't have the.
That's okay. It's great so far. I think maybe we should pause and go back to a couple of questions that have been coming up. So I think on the last page, we had talked a bit about selecting which of the mentorship programs. So Paula is actually asking if you're participating in a Forte MBA Launch on Demand program, would you select the box of Forte? And I
Yes.
believe yes. Okay.
Yes.
And then Robert also had a quite interesting question. You had mentioned before that there was a checkbox about being a first generation college student. I think
Yes.
Robert says, what about mentioning I'd be a first generation postgraduate? And I believe that would be the case of like maybe someone in his family has attended school before but didn't necessarily graduate. Would that be the same as a first generation college student?
No, I don't think so, Robert. I think this is another case. This is a case of like, again, thinking like putting on a little bit of self-awareness and realize like what they are really trying to get at. Usually, since graduate school is pretty similar to undergraduate, if you've gone through an undergraduate program successfully, you probably are going to be able to do the same in the MBA. It's not going to be like, what? You mean I have a class on Mondays, and Fridays, but I don't have that same class on Tuesdays? You mean I have to submit my coursework on an online portal? Like those sorts of things that are new to higher education in general. Most people kind of work through that through the undergraduate. I don't personally, I don't think it would be if you're the first to go to graduate school. That's not, I don't think that's not the spirit of the question. So I actually think if you were to say that, it might actually backfire because it would look like, oh, come on, dude, like that's not what we meant.
All right, that's a great clarification. And then you had already alluded to the fact that the concentrations are something very unique about Booth. So Gurkha Rat is asking, are we allowed to change the concentration afterwards during the course of the MBA?
Yes, these choices are not binding. And in fact, anyone who goes through the Applicant Lab Career Vision module, you know that, like whatever you put in your application, you don't have to do, for the most part, you really don't have to do it. There are obviously some exceptions, like the MIT LGO program, which is for people who are really into operations. Obviously, if you get into that program and then suddenly say, guess what, I hate operations, oops, then you're stuck because the whole program is based around, the combination of MBA and operations. But for something like this, a general MBA program, you can do whatever. So because as soon as you set foot on campus, go for it. Like do international business, do strategic management, do whatever. But because I am a very pragmatic person and my goal is to try to maximize your chances of getting accepted, I'm like, just tell the story that is the least friction, that provides the least amount of cognitive friction. So yes, don't be like, oh no, like I have to figure out the next 3 years of my life and my whole career from, like, nope. As soon as you set foot on campus, no one is going to care. No one is going to chase you on graduation day if you
Okay,
end up doing something different.
that's perfect. And I think that goes in hand with what the post-graduation fields are when you only have 250 characters, just try to make it simple.
Yes, indeed. And realize that the bigger that gap is between where you've been in the past and where you want to go in the future, the more the onus is on you to have to explain why. Like, why are you interested in this? Can you
Right.
prove to me that you actually mean it? This is especially true for anyone who out there who might be tempted to say, well, even though right now I work in investment banking, I'm going to pretend because I'm going to pretend that I'm really interested in sustainability because then they're going to like me, right? Because I'm going to sound like a do-gooder. That backfires. If all of a sudden you pretend to be a do-gooder or you're I'm super committed to helping low-income people get educations. Okay, great. Where's the volunteer work? Are you working for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? Are you working for a charter school? Like, no? Huh. So again, like I'm not saying you can't get in with a big switch like that, but just realize that the bigger the switch, the bigger the burden of proof is now on you as an applicant to show me that you're sincere and that you're actually going to get hired. And my career services office is not going to get an angry call from a recruiter who's like, I schlepped all the way to Chicago and it's winter and I'm miserable and I didn't hire a single good person here and I'm not coming back next year.
All right. Okay, perfect. Let's keep going with the previous application section.
Okay, great. This is basically like if you've already applied in the past, if you're a reapplicant, they want to know, basically like when was that? Was it a year ago? Was it 4 years ago? And then some of these are very specific. Chicago Booth Summer Business Scholar, University of Chicago Dugan Scholar. I actually had to look this up. It's basically if you went to the University of Chicago, I mean, talk about niche. If you went to the University of Chicago for undergrad and you did this program, you were able to take some MBA level classes as an undergrad. I think I'm understanding that correctly. So I can't imagine that that's a whole bunch of people in the applicant pool. Anywho, and then so the Booth community, again, in the wake of the abolishment of the affirmative action, there are other ways for the schools to try to get a sense of, do you have a certain ethnic or cultural background? And so here you would select the group that most fits your background. It's all the better if you have done something in the past. So, for example, let's say you've got the Canadian business group. If you went to another country for college and you were in the Canadian business group in college, and you say you want to continue with that in graduate school, so much the better. But if you haven't, don't worry about it. It's at least a way to you might end up getting. I don't think all of these clubs have the bandwidth to reach out to every applicant, but they might reach out to you and be like, especially if they're Canadian because they're so friendly up there in Canada, like, hey, you're applying for Booth, eh? Like, let's talk about hockey, and I don't know. We're here to help you and answer your questions. So you might as well select that. Don't go overboard. Don't select like 20 of them. Again, use your smart your self-awareness as much as possible. And then here is where they start to get a sense of, okay, have you actually taken the time to get to know me? Or are you just jumping right into this marriage? You've seen my profile pic. I use a lot of dating analogies in this world. You've seen my profile picture. You think I'm cute. And so now you want to jump into marriage? Like, whoa, hold on. Like, have you actually gotten to know me? If so, how have you gotten to know me? So if you're watching this video and there's still like at least like a day or two prior to the application deadline, try to find like at least a webinar online or something where you can mention it here, to at least show that you've taken some time to try to get to know them. Because, and this ties in with the next question, when it says what has been your primary source of information about the full-time MBA program, put whatever one actually has been the primary source, but please don't put rankings, because Chicago has done very well in the rankings recently, and as they should. They're an amazing program, but they don't want you to be applying there just because you read them. You read a ranking and you're like, "Ooh, they're number one in this ranking. I'm applying there." It's kind of like, again, to use another dating analogy, sorry, but if someone's like a 90-year-old billionaire and they've got like the 20-year-old partner and they're like, yeah, do you actually love me or for my money? Like, even if everyone actually, like, yeah, everyone knows that, you're with them for the money, it does, like, no one wants to hear it, right? It's the same thing with rankings. Like, schools love doing well in the rankings. They pretend that they don't care, but they actually love it. And everyone knows that, of course, if a school does well in the rankings, of course, it's going to get more attention from applicants. However, just like with someone someone marrying you just for your money, they don't want you to go there just because they're, a top 5, top 1, top 2 program. They want to make sure that this is actually a really good fit for you. So put whatever you want, but do not pick rankings, because then you will look really shallow. And as a side note, like, if you get accepted to Booth or to any of these business schools and you don't get a scholarship, because scholarship money is not nearly as it's available, but it's not nearly as plentiful for MBA as it is for, say, undergrad, then they don't want you later on to be like, oh, well, I don't actually know anything about this program, and you want me to pay, I have to pay how much? It's how much per year, right? They don't want you to then get cold feet. That's part of the reason why they want to make sure that you really know them well, so that when that first tuition deposit invoice comes in, you will not freak out. Okay, moving on to family. So you are going to enter information about your parents. And I think you can put a lot of, so if you have like your biological parents and your step parents and things like that, I don't think there's a limit to how many you can put. If you are married, I thought this was an interesting, I'm going to zoom in a little here. I thought this was an interesting distinction. If you're married, great, let us know about your spouse. Now, if you have a significant other, it seems like they just want you to mention that significant other if you're both applying to Booth or if they're currently going to Booth, which I think is interesting, but it makes sense when you think about it. Like, you know, obviously it is possible to have very serious, meaningful, and deep relationships with people with whom you are not yet married, but marriage does indicate a certain higher level of commitment. Um, and so just telling me like, yeah, I've got this boyfriend, I've got this girlfriend, and I don't know, it's like TMI, too much information. I don't care. The reason they ask, are they also applying or are they currently a student, is just because that way, honestly, it's more of a yield question. Yield being, if I offer you a spot, are you going to send me that tuition check? Are you going to say yes and then subsequently enroll? So if your partner is currently studying at Booth, now I know that I've got a really good, there's a really high probability that if I let you in, you're going to come. But aside from that, I don't necessarily care about your dating life, as I believe is appropriate. And then if you have a relative affiliated with Chicago Booth or the University of Chicago. So if someone in your family has gotten a degree from Chicago, you can enter them. This is kind of funny. I tried to pick it so that it's like, if I'm like, okay, I'm going to put my sister, let's just say, and then are they an alumnus of the program? No. Are they affiliated with Booth? Like, do they work at the University of Chicago, or is there any affiliation? And if I put no, and then I save, let me see, at least before it didn't save. It just sort of passive aggressively, yeah. It just kind of like passive aggressively was like, no, no, girl, you're not allowed to do it. Um, okay. Marital status, and if you have children, okay. Moving on. Academics is pretty straightforward. Note that every school has slightly different things that they ask for. Every school is probably going to ask you to upload a copy of your transcript. They do not want you to mail them an official transcript. That part comes later. Once you're accepted and they're doing the background checks to make sure that you didn't lie anywhere in your application, that's when you contact your university registrar and you have them send the thing in the sealed envelope with the whatever and the stamp and all that stuff. But for the purposes of applying, you just need to upload basically a scanned PDF. That is the same for pretty much every school. The other thing that's pretty similar for almost every school is you need, if the transcript language is not English, you need to have a certified translation of it. So it can't just be you translating it on your own. You are going to have to pay a professional translator or someone who has some sort of a seal or some sort of a, I think in Spain they're called like the apostille. I mean, it differs from country to country, but you are going to need to do that. So if you're listening to this and you haven't done that yet, and this applies to you, just try to bake in some extra time in your preparation, because it might take you a couple days to find someone who's available and things like that. So you are going to need to upload that transcript translation in English. And then where do the schools differ? Some of them differ for things like these non-degree, if you've done like a Coursera course, or if you've done, MBA math or HBX core or one of those. Some schools are like, yeah, enter it here. And some schools are like, we don't really care. So my only advice here is just, read instructions, tell the truth, and also quality over quantity. So please don't list like if you took like a 3-session Coursera course that was free and not credit giving on, I don't know, whatever, mindfulness, that's great. Cool. I love it. But that doesn't mean you have to put it on your application, right? Always keep in mind that there are real people on the other side of the screen that are going to be reading this PDF, and put yourself in their shoes, right? Would you want to get like 4 pages of the PDF, like some dinky, free online course that doesn't even have a grade, like, I don't know. Again, use some self-awareness. Realize that just because you can fill something out doesn't mean you have to or you necessarily should. So I would maintain this for things that are substantial, or that might be relevant to an MBA admissions officer, right? So if you've taken some classes on how to, I don't know, cook a great filet mignon, awesome. Not the place for this. Now, here is something that is sort of different and noteworthy. Awards and honors. They want you to list, they give you like one big text box for any collegiate academic or athletic awards. Now, when I first read this, I thought this was a little bit strange, because oftentimes people will get awards for their extracurricular involvement, right? They're oftentimes either some sort of a, you're the winner of the whatever scholarship, best leader of the undergraduate student body award. If it's for an extracurricular, where I'm going to have you put that a little bit later is in activities later on. So It's a little weird that they're not like, just tell us about all kinds of awards you won. They specify academic or athletic awards. So yeah, put those there. And I don't think one of my tricks is to figure out, because sometimes they tell you exactly like you have 500 characters here, and sometimes they don't really tell you. So I don't want you to like spend all this time in a separate document typing out this really long thing and then you go to paste it in and it won't paste it. So if you type 0 through 9, that's 10 digits. So copy and then paste. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Now I'm going to copy that. That's 100, 200, 300. Oh, I'm hitting paste like you can't hear me necessarily. Yeah, this is an unlimited box.
Quick question about this. Huizafa is asking, if I don't have any awards or honors, would that be a red flag?
It's not necessarily a red flag. I mean, obviously, it's a competitive program, and so it's better to have them, but it's okay if you don't. For anyone who maybe their undergraduate academic record in particular was maybe not as strong as they would like it to be, that's where the standardized test is going to be your best friend. Because the standardized test, because of the word standard, it means that everyone gets roughly the same type of test. And therefore, it's a really great way to show them that you can compete academically, that you're not going to be the person in the class that the professors hate who's like, I'm sorry, can you say that? I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Wait, what? What is a number? I've never seen numbers before. Can you explain to me what a number is? Like, they're trying to avoid that. So if you have an academic record that is not as strong as you would want it to be, that's where doing well on the standardized tests are your best friends. Those are like that's your escape hatch. So it's not a red flag per se. Poor academic performance in undergrad can be a red flag, but the good news is when we get to additional information over here, that's where you can explain the circumstances under that, are part of that, what caused that, and therefore you can sort of say like, hey, I was working 20 hours a week, or whatever, I sprained my ankle and I couldn't go to class, or whatever the circumstance was. So a lot of schools ask us below, were you ever kicked out of school? Basically, were you cheating, or were you doing something like that, or did you start but not complete a postgraduate program? Because they want to make sure that if they let you in, that you're actually going to go and stick with it and not be like, oh, this is hard, never mind, and then you drop out. Okay, so for employment, I think this one for the employment, yes. So months of full-time professional experience at matriculation. Most of the schools do ask for you to put this at matriculation and not as of today. Just keep in mind, if you did have periods of unemployment, don't count those months in your total months of employment. And if you did have any gaps, layoffs, or terminations in your employment, you do need to explain it. Do not assume that they won't notice, because I'm going to have your resume, and later on, I'm going to have your listing of the different start and stop dates for different jobs. So if I don't think that I'm not going to notice a gap, because when you do this and all you do is read resumes all day and read applications all day, that's a red flag. That's something that sticks out like a sore thumb. So if you have had a period of unemployment, that's fine. The period of unemployment in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. However, it can be a problem if you're like, oh, I'm just not going to mention it, because this is a fact of human nature. Whenever a human being is presented with an ambiguous situation, we are wired to always assume the worst. It's that whole fight or flight thing. Thanks, amygdala. So if you have like a 4-month gap, maybe it was all perfectly copacetic, and you had another job offer and you were like, hey guys, I want to travel, and they said, great, come to us in 4 months. But if you don't tell me that and I just see a 4-month gap, I'm going to assume the worst. I'm going to assume you were fired and then you couldn't get a job and everyone laughed at you, and oh boy, if this person couldn't get a job, then what are our employers, our corporate recruiters, going to think when this person comes to get. So it's in your best interest to explain it. If you need advice on how to do that, I do have advice in Applicant Lab on how to address it depending on your specific situation for your unemployment. Then it asks you if your employer, or if the government, or if is anyone helping you pay for your degree. And then here is where professional awards or recognition you have received. Some schools will have like an awards section where it's like any award you've gotten in the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years from college until now, like you can put it here, or pick your top 3 awards that you're proudest of and put them here. Booth kind of has the awards kind of scattered all over. So this is where you're going to want to put your professional award. And then at the bottom is your resume. Okay, so for recommendations, you need 2 of them. The one thing there are 2 things I want to point out here. First of all, and this applies to every school, when you are sending your recommendation request to your 2 recommenders in this case, you will get an option that says, I waive my right to access this report, or I do not waive my right to access this report. It's a weird way to phrase it. You want to waive your right to access the report. Basically, what this is saying is that you're not going to then like sue them later or try to, read what your recommender wrote about you. And why does it matter? Because if I am your recommender and I know that you're going to maybe read what I wrote about you a year from now, I might hold back a little, right? I might not tell the admissions committee about this worry that I have about you, or I might kind of dial back some of those criticisms. And in that case, the recommendation is pointless. If every recommendation only says perfect things all the time, this candidate is perfect and that everything they do is perfect, there's no point in even having a recommendation. So if you don't waive the right to access the report, it might seem like your recommendation is maybe not as fully transparent and honest and genuine as it could have been. And then this is interesting. Why did you choose these 2 recommenders? So here, sometimes the schools will say, if you don't have your current boss as a recommender, right? Because you are always ideally, your current boss is going to be your recommender, or a boss that has worked with you recently in some sort of significant capacity. Something like that is going to be your recommender. If for whatever reason, like I can't tell my boss that I'm leaving, or my boss thinks MBAs are stupid, or whatever it is, then they will say, only explain to us if your current supervisor is not your recommender, then explain to us why that is. Booth this is pretty unique. Just explain to us why you chose both of those recommenders. So what you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to explain, like, this person has seen me in a leadership capacity, and therefore they can speak to the kind of person I am, the kind of leader I am, the kind of manager I am, the kind of professional potential I have, or what have you. So I think that's an interesting. Sometimes I think it's kind of obvious why you chose a recommender. Like if it's my current boss, like obviously that's why, but it's kind of interesting that they are going to ask you. And by the way, in case, another reason, there's so many reasons to not procrastinate during this horrible process of applying to business school. But another one of millions of reasons is that you don't want it to be like, oh, the application is due in 5 hours. Let me jump in right now and fill it out. And then, oh, here's a box about why did I choose oh God, I haven't written anything for this. Now I'm stuck. Like you don't want that to happen. So that's why I advocate trying to fill these in as soon as possible. Moving on to the essays. So this is my brain starts to explode a little when the first essay for Booth is, how will the Booth MBA help you achieve your immediate and long-term post-MBA career goals? But there was someplace else in the application where they asked me for my career goals and they gave me that little box. And then they also had the drop-down boxes. And then now you're asking me a separate essay that has a 250 word minimum. But anyway, I just wish schools would just let it, can I just have it in one big place? Instead of having to take my rationale and what I want to do and kind of like paste it, okay, this goes here and that goes there and this goes someplace else. But anyway, so this is going to basically be your career vision, and then why Booth. So here's where you're going to talk about the different offerings that Booth has that just so happen to coincidentally fit smack dab right into your plans. Don't forget whatever it is that you put earlier about what your concentration is going to be. Make sure that that's the same. And then their second essay is, an MBA is as much about personal growth as it is about professional development. In addition to sharing your experiences and goals in terms of career, we'd like to learn more about you outside of work. Use this opportunity to tell us something about who you are. 250 word minimum. That's a pretty ambiguous essay prompt, but I've got thoughts inside of applicantlab.com. So if you want to sign up for my product and hear my take on this essay question, you can do that. One thing to note, Many schools will sometimes give you a chance to upload your essays as a PDF. This doesn't. This does not. So I cannot put italics or bold stuff. So keep that in mind when you're drafting your essays, that any sort of formatting, it's not going to carry over. So just letting you know that now, so that way you don't spend a lot of time like, oh, should I italicize this? Should I bold it? I need to get it just right. And then you get here and it's like, womp, womp, you can't do anything. You can't,
Quick
you just,
question on the essays. So I know you
yeah.
mentioned there's definitely tons more detail in applicant lab, but some confusion about the 250 word minimum. Would you have some general guidance on how long these essays should be?
Yes, indeed. Look, at the end of the day, I'll answer your question in a concrete way in a moment. But at the end of the day, like, remember, these are people, real people, reading these and so put yourself in their shoes. If you are reading, and during admission season, sometimes at some of the top schools, they have to read 20 files in a day. If you get a 4,000 word essay, like, how would you react? Right? You pull open the PDF and it's like page 1 of 8. Right? Like, why is the Booth MBA good for you? And it says like page 1 of 8. Like, would you be like, yes, woo, I love this applicant? No, you would be like, good God, right? You would, even if it's like a Nobel Prize winning essay, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for this. So I advocate, I think somewhere between 500 to 1,000 words is probably about right. Most other schools that have similar essay questions have around, they say, 400, 750 words, somewhere between there limit. So I would sort of use other schools as a general rule of thumb. Anything above 1,000 words, really ask yourself, like, am I adding a lot of value with these extra words, to the point where if I assume that the person is reading this at 6:45 p.m. on a Friday night and they have read 99 other files this week, and I'm the 100th file they are reading this week, and it's late on a Friday and I'm the last file they have to read before they can start their weekend, like, are they, is this extra 200 words, does it add enough value such that, like, it's worth the extra sort of like, oh, that kind of like moment of like, oh, that moment where you pull open a document is so long, or you open an email, right, and you're like, it's so long. So that's my general take, is somewhere around, let's say, 750, give
All
or
right.
take 250.
That's great advice. Yeah, I keep hearing your theme reiterating of make sure you remember there's a person reading the application on the other end. That's great advice.
Yes. And another thing that I also emphasize is that the person on the other side, most people who work in admissions, some of them have MBAs themselves. Many of them do. Many of them are actually graduates of the program. But those who aren't come often from human resources and recruiting backgrounds. So that's really important. If you have a very technical job and you're like, I'm a currency trader and I use the whatever platform to trade the Bollinger Bands. I'm just going to throw random finance words. Like, they might not know what that means necessarily. Or if you're an engineer, right, don't just be like, well, I optimize the whatever, API, blah, blah, blah. Like, they're not necessarily going to know. So that's another thing to keep in mind too with your resume or your essays. They might not know it all or understand what you do. Okay, we are chugging along, 4:43. Okay. And so now you can add some activities, your current and past involvement in extracurricular activities. So this is where I think, oh gosh, I did not mean to hit that. I meant to do this. Okay, sorry, I meant to do this. So in the activities, the description box, let me see, did I tell how much it is? I did not put how much it is. Well, it does seem to be a limit. Like, it won't just let me, I think it will. Well, let's just try it. 8, 9. And while I'm doing this, by the way, if you're liking this video, help the YouTube algorithm help us out by giving us a big old like on this video, because then that helps GMAT Club and helps get you more good content. So 20, 30, 40, 60, 70, 100, copy this, 200, 300, 400. Oh no. Oh yeah, I think this one caps at 500 characters. So just keep that in mind. That doesn't mean you should fill out all 500 characters, but this is where, you know how earlier when we were talking about education, they only specifically ask about academic or sports awards? This is where I think if you did win an award for leading the student government at your college or something like that, I here in the description of the participation, I would also add like, thanks to my efforts, I was awarded the class of 1917 leadership medal or whatever upon graduation. So that's where you could put this here. As with all things, quality, not quantity. So if you volunteered once at a pet shelter and you never went back, and you didn't really do anything while you were there, maybe don't mention it here. So I would try to focus on the activities that for which you've had like significant involvement over a sustained over a period of time, and ideally one in which you have had some sort of a leadership role, even if you haven't formally been in a leadership position, something where in that little description box where you can say like, well, actually we had this fundraiser, we were raising money for the animal shelter, and I baked a bunch of, I don't know, dog treats and I sold them and we raised $1,000, like that sort of stuff. Try to limit it to those things. So then that way it's like you're showing them that you're a leader in a variety of contexts in your life, and also you're not diluting the truly good stuff you have by also being like, oh, and once I donated a pair of socks to some sort of like, mm, I would rather that you have, say, 3 really strong things here as opposed to 12, of which only 3 are strong and the rest are kind of like, "Mwah," kind of not really worth it. All right, moving on to test scores. The testing that, here's where you're gonna add, and this is the same for all of the schools. You're like, "Okay, here's the this is the one, this is the test I wanna report, here's the date, the scores, the percentiles, etc." Um, One thing that's interesting is that schools will often want to know how many times you've taken a given test. How many times have you received a total GMAT or GRE score? And I think that this was interesting for me because I was asking myself, how now you young kids today, it's so much easier for you. If you get a bad score, I think you can cancel it, right? You can be like, oh, pretend it didn't happen, but you see your score first and then you cancel it. Um, so this wording was really interesting. How many times have you received a GMAT or GRE score? So I don't know if that counts for canceled scores. I would, to be safe, always put that maximum number because let's say you've taken it 5 times and you canceled 2 of those scores. If they then later on in this process get like the full score report and they see that you have those 2 cancellations on there, if you put 3 here, I think it risks sort of looking like, so you wanted to sweep those 2 canceled ones under the rug, eh? So I would just sort of put as many times as you've actually taken it. This is neither here nor there, but I had an email in my support inbox today. If you've taken the GMAT 3 times already, statistically speaking, after that 4th time, you're not, statistically speaking, most people do not do better after the 4th time. So you might want to switch to another test at that point. It kills me when I see people who are like, I've taken the GMAT 7 times, and then they list out, and then it's like the best one was like the 3rd one, and then they don't go up from there. So um, I think it's good if your score is a little bit on the lower side. You know, I maybe try to take it again. So at least that way you're sort of showing them like, hey guys, I know that my score maybe isn't super great, but I tried again. I'm sticking with it. But if you put that I've taken it 10 times, I mean, at a certain point, it also looks like, what's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. Um, so maybe, yeah, at that point, maybe just switch to another test. And then that way you only have to put that test twice. You don't necessarily get bonus points for doing the same thing repeatedly and getting the same result. And then, as with a lot of schools, you might not have to take a English language assessment if you're from a country where English is the native language. You don't have to take the test. Or if you attended a university where English was the primary language of instruction. Ooh, in this case, the only language of instruction. Look at you. That's a stronger way to phrase it. So here you would put why you don't think you need to enter a test, but if you do, then realize that you can do the Duolingo test, which I actually think is great. Okay, I think we're pretty much done. So the additional information. So remember earlier when I talked about like there's like this optional essay. So let's say maybe your grades weren't as awesome as you wish they would have been, or something like that you're like, oh, I worry that if they see this, it might be a bit of a red flag. This is where you can explain it in the additional information, usually called the optional essay by other schools. So is there any unclear information in your application that needs further explanation? This is because they already gave you a box for recommender. I'm trying to think of like, what are the main reasons people will get that optional essay? One is my boss is not a recommender, but I was already able to sort of explain. Presumably you could say something in that box in the recommendation section where it says, why did you choose these recommenders? You could say, well, I wasn't able to choose my boss because my boss thinks MBAs are stupid and I would get fired. So that's why instead I chose such and such person. Or sometimes you might use the optional essay to explain a period of unemployment. But again, they already gave that to you someplace else. So off the top of my head, I think this would primarily be a place to explain collegiate undergraduate grades that you don't feel truly represent your academic strengths. We are almost there. Acknowledgements. So every school is going to have at the end kind of like this honor code, like I swear this is all my own work. One thing that is a little bit unique to Booth that I thought was interesting was they specifically say, like, if anything, where is it? There's something where, like, if you fail to notify Chicago Booth of material changes to your application information. So this is interesting because a lot of schools will say, like, okay, at the time of applying, is everything you say correct? So let's say you get fired the day after you hit submit. If you get invited to interview, like you might have to massage the story a little bit, but Booth is saying if something big happens, like let's say you get fired, like you have to tell us when that happens. So that was something that was a little bit different from other schools where it's more of like yeah, we might want to know, but you know what, like you can save it for the interview and then you can explain to your interviewer what happened, or you can try to, you can try to not sweep it under the rug, but you don't have to focus on it. But for Booth, they really want to know. And the final little section, and you're like, this isn't the final section, there's a thing called review. But review is basically like an automated thing that's like, you forgot to fill out a box over here. So the last like actual section you need to fill out is, and I love this, they're like, remember how earlier I said, like, yeah, there are scholarships available, but just maybe not as many as you might have been used to for undergrad or for other fields of graduate study.
Maria, I'm no longer getting your audio for some reason. Are you muted?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think you're back.
All of a sudden my mic, like, I can hear it myself, and all of a sudden it shorted out, and I'm like, I don't know. So apologies if you could in fact hear me and you just heard me say, can you hear me? Can you hear me 15 times? Okay.
All right.
Super quick.
Yeah, the scholarships.
Okay. Look, they are telling you up front, and I love that schools are getting more savvy with this. Chicago Booth only gives out scholarship awards based on the overall merit of the application. In case you're curious what that means, it's either extraordinary levels of leadership, like you have uncommonly high levels of responsibility and impact for someone your age, or barring that, it usually means having a high GMAT score. Really. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what that means. So they are letting you know up front, like, since it's all merit-based, we do not offer need-based scholarships. So what are they saying here? What they're saying is, I don't need this on anymore. What they're saying is, if you get accepted and then we send you a bill for like $30,000 for that first semester payment, like, please don't say, oh no, I didn't know I'd have to pay money for this degree. I can't do that. Like, they're telling you up front, you might have to take out loans. You might have to pay money. You might not. If you don't have to, great, but you might have to. So that's kind of their way of, it's like, I would like to be considered for merit-based awards. Like, who is going to put no here? Obviously, you're going to select yes. I can't imagine that anyone is going to not select yes. But I think that the main reason they do this, I think that they would just automatically consider everyone for awards. I think that part of why they ask this question is to give them an excuse to say, like, yoo-hoo, we do not offer need-based scholarships. or what have you, just to kind of give you that heads up. Because I think that they are sick of doing a ton of work to let someone in. And then that person's like, oh, oops, no, never mind. You mean I have to pay for this? No, I'm out of here. And I was like, what did I do all that work for? So I think that's pretty much the application. I have a whopping 6 minutes left. This might be a record for me, given how much I tend to go over.
This is great. Thank you so much for walking us through everything. We actually have a bunch of questions that we should try to race through in the last couple minutes here. But for everyone watching, if you are on the live and we don't get to your question, please post it as a comment and we'll come back and answer them later. If you're watching this on replay at some other time, also leave a comment and we'll come back intermittently and try to answer all of everyone's questions. So yeah, one question from Robert. I know that you mentioned in the application, there's a couple different areas for different types of awards. Are undergraduate scholarships considered to be awards? I imagine it kind of depends on the nature of the scholarship. Would that be right?
That's exactly right. So if you got the scholarship for academics, I think it would go there. But if you got it for some sort of a leadership, this is why, because of my leadership of the student body, whatever, this is why I was given the whatever award. I think I would put that in the activity section.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Utkarsh is curious, would you have any information or advice for deferred admissions?
I do. I think, well, so for deferred admissions, basically think about the fact that they're still going to be looking for the same stuff. They're just going to have a lot less data to go on. So for deferred admissions, your academic record in college is going to be much more important than it is for someone who is, say, 5 or 6 years out. Your internships are going to take a lot of importance, whereas someone who's applying at the 5-year mark might not even mention the internships they had. So, in terms of advice, you're not going to do anything differently, really, as far as I know. I don't think Booth has separate. Some schools will have slightly separate essay questions for the deferred applicants. I think Columbia, off the top of my head, does. I don't think Booth does, but don't quote me on that. But the same advice is going to apply. You're going to want to show your leadership skills. You're going to want to focus on those interpersonal skills and things of that nature. And what Booth defines as leadership, which is slightly different compared to some other programs.
Makes sense. Okay. And then a couple questions about the score. Definitely some very unique wording that I said, report how many times you received the total score. So Meenakshi is curious, what if one of the scores is expired, like you took it over 5 years ago?
Ooh, Meenakshi, that's a great question. Because then I don't actually, because the test is not what I do, and that's what the rest of GMAT Club does, I don't actually know if an expired score would show up. Like, would they even know that you took it?
I'm thinking it's a score you did receive, but it's not a currently, eligible score.
My take on that would be, because I tend to err on the side of being as honest as possible, I would include that in the total number of times. But then if you're like, oh, this is kind of weird, or like my score report only has 5 scores, even though I've taken it 7 times, maybe that's where you just put a 1-sentence thing in the optional essay of like, in case you're wondering why I said 7 and the report only has 5, here's why.
Makes sense. Okay. And Paula also has a question about the scores. What if you only took the score once? Would it seem like a lack of effort somehow?
I think in the case, Paula's saying if your score was between 670 to 700, not all GMAT scores are created equal, but if you are from a competitive overrepresented bucket, by that I mean if you're from banking, management consulting, or engineering, that is going to be a lower than average score. And so I do think that it risks looking a little like, look, if you just took it last week and the deadline is next week, then you're obviously not going to like just retake it tomorrow. That's probably not going to yield a very good result. But if you took it like a year ago and you didn't do very well, I do think it risks looking a little bit like, look, we publish the averages out there.
the biggest reasons why a lower score is often forgiven. So Paola, case this is for you. For people who are not native English speakers and who grow up in a country where the main language of discussion and instruction is not English, if your verbal score was lower and that dragged down the overall score below a 700, that does tend to get a little bit more forgiven, quote unquote, versus if the quant is low, especially for a school like Booth. Booth is probably the most quant heavy school out there in the top schools. So if that GMAT quant score was low, then I would definitely advise retaking it or aiming for maybe the GRE instead.
Okay, that's really perfect. We do have a couple more questions that we're not able to get to today, but unfortunately we have to end the session since we have another session coming up. Thank you guys so much for joining. Maria, thank you for being here and answering questions. Make sure everybody to check out applicantlab.com, leave a like on the video, all of that. Maria, anything else to add?
No, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Best wishes, and just get started as early as you can. These forums take a lot more time than you think they're going to.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.